"Are you lost, Grandpa? The air show isn't for another month." The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of smug certainty that only youth and a little bit of authority can produce. It belonged to a young man in a flightline technician's uniform, his name tag reading Kyle. He had his arms crossed, a posture of pure impatience. As he stood over the old man didn't respond. He remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed not on the condescending technician, but on the silent, monolithic form of the F-16 Fighting Falcon before them. The jet sat dead on the tarmac, a sleek predator rendered inert. Its canopy was open like a broken jaw, and a nest of diagnostic cables snaked from an open maintenance panel, a testament to a problem no one could solve. The old man's name was Arthur Vance. His back was slightly stooped by more than 80 years of gravity, and his hands resting calmly at his sides were roadmaps of wrinkles and faded scars. He wore simple khaki pants and a worn, plain windbreaker, an outfit that made him look like a tourist who had wandered far past the designated viewing areas. Another, slightly older technician joined Kyle, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy glove. "Anything. Just this guy," Kyle scoffed, jutting his chin toward Arthur. "I think he thinks it's a museum piece." "Sir," he said, his voice loud and slow as if speaking to a child, "you can't be here. This is a restricted area. I need you to go back to the gate." Arthur's eyes, pale blue and cloudy with age, finally shifted. They didn't look at Kyle, but instead traced the fuselage of the fighter jet, following lines that only he seemed to see. He took a slow, deliberate step closer to the aircraft's landing gear. Kyle's frustration, already simmering from hours of fruitless work on the grounded jet, boiled over. "I said, step away from the aircraft, now." He moved to intercept, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder to steer him away. "This is a $16 million piece of military hardware, not a park bench. What do you think you're doing?" Arthur's gaze finally met Kyle's. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, not even annoyance. There was only a quiet, profound focus, as if Kyle were a minor distraction, a buzzing insect in a room that held a far more interesting puzzle. The pressure on the flight line was immense. The grounded F-16, callsign Viper 07, was the lead plane for a critical readiness exercise scheduled to launch in less than an hour. A visiting delegation of foreign dignitaries was already waiting in the command tower, and the base's wing commander was making his displeasure known over the radio net in clipped, progressively colder tones. Every technician on the flight line felt the heat, but Kyle, as the lead, was taking the brunt of it. He and his team had been chasing ghosts in the machine for 3 hours. They had swapped out the entire avionics control unit, tested the power relays and run diagnostics until the computer screens blurred. Nothing. The F-16 was a brick. This old man's appearance felt like the final insult, a symbol of the world's maddening refusal to cooperate with his plans. "I need to see some identification, sir," Kyle demanded, his voice echoing with the false authority of a man losing control. "Your flight line pass, now." Arthur didn't reach for a wallet. Instead, his hand slowly went to the pocket of his windbreaker and emerged with a small, worn leather pouch, the kind a man might use for carrying tobacco or spare parts. It was dark with age and the oil from his hands. Kyle let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What is that, your toolkit? What are you gonna do, fix a fly-by-wire system with a pocket knife and some twine?" A few of the other techs, drawn by the confrontation, chuckled nervously. They were young, most of them in their early 20s, and they followed Kyle's lead. The scene was becoming a small spectacle on the vast, heat-shimmered expanse of the tarmac. A circle was forming around the dead jet, the young uniformed crew, and the silent elderly civilian. "Sir, I am not going to ask you again," Kyle said, his face reddening. "Get away from this aircraft, or I will have you escorted off this base by security forces." Arthur ignored the threat. His attention was elsewhere. He unrolled the leather pouch with a slow, deliberate motion. Inside, nestled in soft felt, were not the crude tools Kyle had imagined, but a small, curated set of instruments. They were clearly old, some of them looking handmade, their steel darkened with a patina of age and use. One was a strange-looking spanner wrench with a uniquely angled head. Kyle stared at the tools, his derision deepening. "Are you kidding me? Where did you get that junk? A World War II surplus store. You probably flew biplanes, didn't you, Pops? Things were a lot simpler back then." As Kyle's mocking words hung in the hot air, Arthur's fingers brushed against the handle of the peculiar spanner wrench. The feel of the worn metal was a key, unlocking a door in his mind. The world dissolved from the bright sun-bleached tarmac to the dim, oppressive humidity of a makeshift hangar in Da Nang decades ago. The air was thick with the smell of burnt kerosene, sweat and fear. A battle-damaged F-4 Phantom, its wing riddled with shrapnel, stood dripping hydraulic fluid onto the concrete floor. A younger Arthur, his face taut with focus and smudged with grease, was wedged deep inside an open maintenance bay, working by the faint glow of a handheld lamp. The very same spanner wrench was in his hand. Outside, the distant crump of artillery provided a grim soundtrack. A frantic crew chief was shouting, "We need that bird in the air, Art. They're getting hammered out there." Arthur didn't answer. He just gave one final, precise turn with the wrench. A valve seated. The hydraulic bleed stopped. He slid out from under the wing and nodded. "She'll fly." The memory was gone in a flash, a whisper of a past that informed the stillness of the present. Back on the tarmac, the scene had escalated. One of the other technicians, eager to impress Kyle, chimed in. "Maybe he thinks it's a car, needs a jump start." The circle of onlookers widened. On the far side of the flight line, working on another aircraft, was Master Sergeant Reyes. He was a career crew chief, a man with 30 years of service etched into the lines around his eyes. He'd seen hot-headed young team leads like Kyle come and go. He'd been watching the confrontation with a growing sense of unease. At first, he was just annoyed that a civilian had gotten this far onto the tarmac. But then he started watching the old man. It wasn't his clothes or his age, it was his posture. The way he stood. He wasn't looking at the F-16 like a tourist. He was studying it, assessing it. His gaze was methodical, moving from the wing roots to the engine intake to the specific panel Kyle's team had been fighting with. It was the stance of a diagnostician, of a master craftsman sizing up a flawed piece of work. There was an economy of motion, an absolute stillness that Reyes hadn't seen in years. It reminded him of the old legends, the stories the gray-haired maintenance chiefs used to tell about the engineers from the Skunk Works or the original General Dynamics design team, men who could listen to an engine and tell you which specific turbine blade was out of balance. Kyle's patience finally snapped. He reached out and grabbed Arthur's arm, more forcefully this time. "That's it, old-timer. Your little field trip is over. We're going to see security." He started to pull the unresisting old man away from the jet. That was the moment for Master Sergeant Reyes. Something clicked. A name from one of those old stories surfaced in his memory. A ghost story, almost. He pulled out his cell phone, his heart suddenly pounding. He didn't call the security desk. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he rarely used, the direct line to the maintenance group commander's office. The call was picked up by a young captain, Colonel Davison's office. "Sir, this is Master Sergeant Reyes on the flight line," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You're not going to believe this. We've got Viper 07 grounded, the one for the DV flight. The tech team is at a dead end, and their lead is about to have a civilian arrested." "A civilian? How in the hell did a civilian get on the active flight line?" "That's the thing, sir," Reyes continued, watching Kyle try to pull the old man who was now holding his small pouch of tools. "The way he's looking at the Viper, it reminds me of the stories about the ghost of the flight line. The guy who wrote the book on the bird." There was a pause. "Sir, I think his name might be Vance. Arthur Vance." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. The phone call landed like a grenade in the wing commander's office. Colonel Matthews was in the middle of a tense briefing with his operations chief, the grounded F-16, the single, infuriating topic of conversation. His executive officer burst in without knocking, an act that would normally earn him a week of scut work. "Sir, you need to take this call. It's from the MX Group commander's office. It's about the civilian on the flight line." Matthews snatched the phone, his face a thundercloud. "What is it?" He listened, his expression shifting from anger to confusion, and then to stunned disbelief. His knuckles went white on the phone. "Say that name again." He listened once more. "Vance? Are you sure? Arthur Vance?" The colonel's face went pale. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. The operations chief stared, bewildered. "Get me his file." Matthews barked at his aide. "The archive file. The one marked living legend. Now." The aide, sensing the seismic shift in the room, scrambled from his desk and sprinted towards the records vault. Colonel Matthews turned his attention back to the phone, his voice now a low, urgent command. "Listen to me very carefully. Get on the radio to the flight line. I want you to tell that technician, by my authority, to stand down. Do not let anyone touch Mr. Vance. Do not let anyone speak to him. Everyone is to freeze. Is that clear? That is a direct order from the wing commander. I am on my way." He slammed the phone down and grabbed his flight cap. "Get the command car. Now, tell them to clear the way to the main tarmac." But on the sun-baked concrete, the stand-down order had not yet arrived. Time on a flight line can move in strange ways. An hour can feel like a minute, and 10 seconds can stretch into an eternity. For Kyle, emboldened by Arthur's continued silence, This was his moment to reassert his authority in front of his crew and the growing number of onlookers. He was still holding Arthur's thin arm, a tangible symbol of his control. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Look, I get it. Things get confusing when you get older. But you are a danger to yourself and to this equipment. For your own safety, I'm taking you to the security office. They'll get you checked out. Maybe call your family." He was effectively declaring the old man senile, a final public humiliation. He gave Arthur's arm a firm tug, intending to march him across the tarmac in a walk of shame. "Let's go. The show's over." It was at that precise moment that a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't the whine of a jet engine or the crackle of a radio. It was the piercing wail of sirens, and they were getting closer fast. But these weren't the familiar whoop-whoop of the base patrol. This was the powerful deep yelp of command escort vehicles. Heads turned. In the distance, a black staff car, flanked by two imposing security trucks, was racing towards them, lights flashing. They didn't slow as they approached the congested area, but sped on with an alarming lack of caution, scattering airmen who leaped out of the way. The convoy screeched to a halt in a perfectly executed formation just yards from the grounded F-16, creating a barrier between the crowd and the scene. The passenger door of the staff car flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Colonel Matthews, a full-bird colonel with a chest full of ribbons, launched himself out. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He was followed by his command chief master sergeant and the maintenance group commander. They moved with a singular, terrifying purpose. The entire flight line froze. The casual chatter, the nervous laughter, the hum of activity, it all ceased. The arrival of a single wing commander on the flight line was a rare and serious event. The arrival of the commander with his entire senior staff moving like a strike team was unheard of. Kyle stopped dead, his hand still clamped on Arthur's arm. He stared, his mind failing to process the scene. Why was the base's top officer here? For him? For this old man? Colonel Matthews didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the multi-million-dollar jet. His eyes, burning with an intensity that could melt steel, were locked on one person and one person only, Arthur Vance. He strode forward, his polished boots eating up the distance on the concrete. He walked right up to Kyle, his gaze so ferocious that the young technician flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Matthews stopped 2 feet from them. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Kyle's hand on Arthur's arm. The meaning was unmistakable. Kyle snatched his hand away as if the old man's sleeve were red hot. Then Colonel Matthews turned his full attention to Arthur. In one crisp, powerful motion, he brought his hand up to his brow and rendered the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. It was a gesture of such deep, unwavering respect that it seemed to vibrate in the silent air. "Mr. Vance," Colonel Matthews said, his voice ringing with emotion for all to hear. "It is an honor, sir." A collective silent gasp rippled through the crowd of airmen. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Kyle looked as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He swayed slightly, his face completely drained of color. Matthews held the salute for a long, pregnant moment before slowly lowering his hand. He kept his back ramrod straight, addressing Arthur but speaking loud enough for every person on the tarmac to hear his words as a formal decree. For the benefit of those who are too young or too ignorant to know whose presence they are in, Matthews began, his voice booming with authority. "This is Mr. Arthur Vance. In the early days of the Viper program, he was known as the ghost of the flight line because he'd appear out of nowhere and solve problems the engineers swore were impossible." He paused, letting the weight of the title sink in. Mr. Vance was a lead design engineer for the original YF-16 prototype. He personally wrote 3 chapters of the maintenance manual that you technicians use every single day, the very fly-by-wire system that's giving you fits. He holds 2 of the core patents on it. Matthews took a step closer, his eyes scanning the faces of the stunned young airmen. During Operation Desert Storm, a software glitch in the avionics suite grounded an entire forward-deployed squadron. The Pentagon was scrambling. While they were still holding meetings, this man got on a transport, flew into a war zone with a small case of tools, and personally got all 24 Vipers back in the air in 36 hours. He didn't ask for a medal. He didn't ask for a commendation. He just did the work and flew home. The silence on the tarmac was now one of pure, unadulterated awe. Master Sergeant Reyes, watching from the edge of the scene, simply nodded, a look of profound validation on his face. He had recognized greatness, even when it was quiet. "This man," Colonel Matthews concluded, his voice softening with reverence as he looked back at Arthur, "is not just a veteran or a contractor. He is a living part of this aircraft's soul. He has forgotten more about the F-16 than any of us will ever know." Finally, The full, terrifying weight of what he had done crashed down on Kyle. He had not just disrespected an old man. He had mocked a founding father. He had threatened a legend. Colonel Matthews then turned, and the warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as Arctic ice. He fixed it on Kyle. "Technician," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Lethal. What is your name?" "Kyle, sir. Airman first class. Kyle Peterson," he stammered, his own name sounding foreign and foolish in his mouth. "Airman Peterson," Matthews said, the name tasting like poison. "Your arrogance and your ignorance today have brought shame to this wing. You were faced with a problem you couldn't solve, a failure of your own technical skill, and you chose to channel that failure into cruelty. You chose to humiliate a man whose boots you are not worthy of polishing." He stepped closer, his voice dropping even lower. "You looked at a living legend and saw nothing but a target for your own inadequacy. You are a disgrace to that uniform." The public rebuke was devastating, a professional execution performed in front of the entire flight line. Kyle stood, paralyzed by shame, unable to look away from the colonel's wrath. But then, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Colonel, that's enough." It was Arthur. He had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, but now he spoke. His voice was not strong, but it carried an undeniable authority that even the wing commander instantly obeyed. Matthews fell silent. Arthur Vance turned to the trembling young man. He looked at Kyle, not with anger or pity, but with the calm gaze of a teacher. "Son," he said gently, "the machine doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your pride. It only cares about the truth of the problem." He raised a slightly shaky hand and pointed not at the complex avionics bay where Kyle's team had been working, but at a small, almost hidden panel near the portside landing gear strut. "You were all looking in the wrong place," Arthur explained. "You were looking at the brain. The problem isn't in the brain, it's in the nerves. Right there," he pointed again. "That's the hydraulic bypass actuator for the emergency power unit. It's a known issue on the Block 30s, especially after a cold soak at altitude. The valve gets sticky." He looked down at the small leather pouch in his hand which he had held onto this whole time. He unrolled it and picked out the strange custom-made spanner wrench. He held it out to Kyle. "You don't need a computer, you just need to give it a little tap to remind it what it's supposed to do." As Kyle hesitantly reached for the old, dark steel of the wrench, the world flickered again for Arthur. The tool in his hand felt heavy with more than just its own weight. He saw himself 30 years younger, standing in a pristine clean room at the General Dynamics facility in Fort Worth. A man with brilliant eyes and a slide rule in his pocket. The chief designer of the entire F-16 program was handing him this very wrench, freshly milled. "Sometimes, Art," the man had said, his voice full of avuncular wisdom, "the most complex problems in the world don't need a more complex solution. They just need a steady hand and the courage to try the simple thing first. Never forget that." Kyle's fingers closed around the tool. It felt strangely balanced in his hand. Under the silent, watchful gaze of the wing commander, his own crew, and the man he had ridiculed, he walked to the F-16. He knelt down, his movements stiff with dread and humiliation. He found the small actuator Arthur had indicated. It looked insignificant, an afterthought in the jet's complex anatomy. He raised the wrench. For a moment he hesitated, the entire flight line holding its breath. Then, with a gentle, precise motion, he tapped the valve housing. Tap. The sound was tiny, almost lost in the vastness of the tarmac. But it was followed by another, more significant sound, a soft, satisfying hiss of released pressure, a click-clack of a relay seating itself. And then magic. The cockpit of the F-16 flickered to life. The dashboard screens glowed green. The voice of the onboard computer, a calm female voice known affectionately as Bitching Betty, announced, "Main power online." The auxiliary power unit began to whine, spooling up to speed. The dead predator was alive. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd. The problem that had stumped a team of trained technicians with thousands of dollars of diagnostic equipment for 3 hours had just been solved in 3 seconds. With a tap from a homemade tool in the hands of an old man, Colonel Matthews stared at the illuminated cockpit, then back at Arthur, a look of profound respect on his face. He turned to the maintenance group commander. "I want Airman Peterson and his entire team off the line. They're to report for a week-long training seminar starting at 0800 tomorrow. The topic," he said, looking at Arthur, "will be the history and legacy of the F-16 airframe. And the first lesson will be taught by Mr. Vance, if he would do us the honor." A formal base-wide letter of apology was to be drafted and delivered to Mr. Vance personally. The story of what happened on the tarmac would become mandatory reading at the maintenance training schoolhouse. Weeks later, the heat of the incident had cooled. Kyle Peterson was a different man. The arrogance had been sandblasted away, replaced by a quiet humility. He was in the base library, studying old technical orders, trying to learn what he had so clearly missed. He saw Arthur Vance sitting in a worn armchair in the history section, reading a book. Kyle's heart pounded. He bought 2 cups of coffee from the small kiosk and walked over, his steps hesitant. "Mr. Vance?" he said quietly. Arthur looked up from his book, his pale blue eyes holding a spark of recognition, but no malice. I wanted to say thank you," Kyle stammered, placing a coffee on the small table beside Arthur, "for the lesson, and I'm sorry for how I treated you." "There's no excuse." Arthur looked at the young man, at the genuine remorse in his eyes. He gave a small, forgiving nod and gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit down, son." Kyle sat. They didn't speak of the incident on the tarmac again. Instead, Arthur started talking. He talked about the feel of the wind over a new wing design, about the smell of a hot engine, about the challenges of making a machine that was smarter and faster than the pilot, but still obeyed him like a part of his own body. He spoke of the plane not as a weapon, but as a living creation, and Kyle listened, finally understanding that the soul of the machine was not in its wires or its software, but in the spirit of the people who created it. The story of Arthur Vance is a powerful reminder that true legends often walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting not for recognition, but for a problem to solve. If you were moved by this story of unassuming heroism, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that deserve to be told.